You told yourself you would leave the next time it happened. Then it happened, and you stayed. Not because you were weak, not because you failed to see the problem. You stayed because something inside you had been systematically rewired, and understanding exactly how that works is the only honest place to start. The central question this episode answers is straightforward. Why do people remain in relationships that are clearly causing them harm? The answer is not a character flaw. It is a documented psychological mechanism with a name, a structure, and a pattern that researchers have studied for decades. That mechanism is called traumatic bonding. Psychologists Donald Dutton and Susan Painter described it in the 1980s while studying abusive relationships and domestic violence. At its core, traumatic bonding is the process by which a person develops a strong emotional attachment to someone who is hurting them. Two factors drive its formation: a power imbalance between the two people and a pattern of intermittent rewards and punishments. That second factor, intermittent rewards and punishments, is where the psychological grip comes from, and it is worth slowing down on. The person causing harm is not consistently cruel. If they were, leaving would feel far more straightforward. Instead, the harmful behavior alternates with warmth, affection, apology, or moments of real connection. Cruelty one week, tenderness the next. Coldness followed by closeness. The person on the receiving end begins to endure the bad periods because the good periods feel real and feel worth waiting for. They are not imagining the kindness. It is there, but it is deployed unpredictably, and that unpredictability is precisely what makes the bond so difficult to sever. Behavioral psychology has long documented that intermittent reinforcement, reward delivered on an inconsistent schedule, produces some of the most persistent and resistant patterns of behavior observed in research. It is the same principle that makes certain compulsive behaviors so hard to stop. The reward is real, but its timing is irregular, so the anticipation of the next good moment keeps a person engaged far longer than a consistent reward ever would. In a relationship, that translates into hope. Hope that the kind version is the real version. Hope that this time the cycle will finally break. The stakes of missing this pattern are real. Because the harm and the care are delivered by the same person, the person experiencing it rarely frames it as a clear situation of danger. They frame it as a complicated relationship. They frame it as something they might be able to fix, or survive, or earn their way out of. Each cycle that passes without resolution makes the next cycle harder to leave, because by then the bond has deepened and the independent sense of self has quietly eroded. Time inside the pattern is not neutral. It accumulates. Consider a situation that many people recognize. A person is in a relationship where their partner cycles between intense affection and sudden withdrawal or criticism. After each difficult episode, the partner returns with warmth, remorse, or a gesture of care. The person in the relationship starts to organize their life around managing the partner's moods, trying to be good enough, calm enough, careful enough to keep the warm version present. Over time, their sense of self quietly narrows. Their confidence in their own perceptions weakens. They start to see themselves through the partner's lens, not their own. That erosion of self-image is not accidental or incidental. Research into traumatic bonding describes how victims frequently lose individual agency and autonomy. Their self-concept becomes an internalization of how the abusive person has characterized them. If the message, spoken or unspoken, is that you are difficult, unstable, or lucky to be loved at all, that message starts to feel like the truth. And once a person believes they are lucky to have this relationship, leaving it feels like losing something precious rather than escaping something harmful. A second scenario worth naming involves a friendship or family dynamic rather than a romantic partnership. The power imbalance does not require romance to operate. Research confirms that traumatic bonding can occur in parent-child relationships, platonic friendships, and other contexts where one person holds meaningful control over another, financially, emotionally, socially, or practically. The structure is the same: unpredictable harm followed by unpredictable care, in a context where the person with less power has real or perceived reasons to stay. The person in that friendship or family bond may spend enormous energy trying to understand why the other person behaves the way they do. They may feel responsible for managing the relationship's stability, and when good moments arrive, those moments feel like proof that the relationship is worth preserving, evidence that the difficult behavior is the exception, not the rule, even when the overall pattern tells a different story. So what interrupts the pattern? Recognition is the first real turning point. Not recognition in the sense of labeling the other person or assigning them a diagnosis. That is not within anyone's power, and it is not the goal. Recognition in the sense of seeing the cycle clearly, the alternation between harm and care, the erosion of your own sense of self, the way your behavior has reorganized itself around managing another person's unpredictability. Naming the pattern for what it is, a cycle, not a series of separate incidents, changes what the experience means. It replaces the question of what you did wrong with a more accurate question: what is this dynamic actually doing to me? The second interruption is restoring your own point of reference. Traumatic bonding research describes how victims' self-image becomes shaped by the framing the abusive person imposes on them. Rebuilding that independent self-image often requires time outside the dynamic, conversations with people who reflect back a different picture of who you are, and sometimes structured professional support. A therapist familiar with coercive dynamics can help you distinguish between what you actually believe about yourself and what you have absorbed from someone else's repeated behavior toward you. Practically, recognizing the pattern gives you access to something concrete and useful: documentation. If you are in a situation where the harm is recurring, keeping a private written record of specific incidents, dates, behaviors, what was said or done, creates an external reference point that does not shift the way memory can under sustained emotional pressure. It also creates evidence if professional or legal support becomes relevant later. Safe distance, wherever it is achievable, changes the psychological conditions that sustain the bond. The intermittent reinforcement loop requires proximity to function. Creating space, physical, communicative, or both, interrupts the cycle at the level of the mechanism itself, not just at the level of intention. One important clarification belongs here. The presence of a trauma bond does not mean every difficult relationship contains deliberate cruelty, and it does not mean every person who causes harm fits a clinical category. The research describes a pattern of behavior and its psychological effects on the person experiencing it. It does not diagnose individuals. People can inflict serious psychological harm without a diagnosable condition, and the absence of a label does not reduce the real impact on the person living through it. What matters for recognition and protection is the pattern itself: intermittent harm and reward, power imbalance, and the gradual erosion of the target's independent sense of self. It also bears saying directly, staying is not a sign of weakness, and leaving is not simply a matter of deciding to go. Research documents that many people in trauma bonds are unable or unwilling to leave, and that many who do leave return. That is not a failure of character. It is the mechanism working exactly as the research describes it. Understanding that shifts the question from asking why someone did not just leave to asking what conditions would actually make leaving possible and sustainable over time. Return to where this started. You told yourself you would leave the next time it happened, and then you stayed. Now you understand what was happening beneath that decision. A bond built on unpredictability, shaped by intermittent care and harm, reinforced by the gradual erosion of your own self-image. Seeing the mechanism does not erase the difficulty of recognizing it in your own life, but it does replace confusion with something more accurate, and it replaces self-blame with a clearer, more honest understanding of what was actually happening. The question worth sitting with now is this: which part of what you heard today describes something you already knew, but had not yet found the right words for? This material is educational and is offered to help you recognize harmful patterns and protect yourself. It is not a tool for judging others, diagnosing anyone, or justifying harm in any direction. If you are in a situation that feels unsafe, please reach out to a qualified mental health professional or a support service in your area. The Dark Mind Ledger. Understand the pattern. Protect yourself. This content is for educational and defensive purposes only. Understanding these patterns helps you recognize and protect yourself from manipulation. It is not intended to harm others.